Hello, boys and girls. Welcome back to the Carla Crappy Show. It is week 11 of the college football season, and therefore the 11th show, logically, that we have done so far this college football season. I'm Crappy. There's Carla. Hi, Carla.
Hey, how are you?
Do I have pizza? Do I have pizza on my face? Can't?
You do not have pizza on your face. I think you're good.
Okay, that's good. I am. It is Tuesday. It is also election night, which means I'm at work. And we've just with the newsroom election night pizza, which is a staple. It's pretty much a universal thing.
It is universal. So much so it has a Twitter account.
Yeah. Yes.
At Newsroom Pizza. If you support journalists, and we hope you do, go follow the Newsroom Pizza account because it's hilarious. It's literally pictures of people of newsrooms on election night posting nothing but photos of pizza. It's great. Yeah. And I need to do that, actually. I need to add them with the pizza I just had. But I will do that in a little bit. So I'm at work. That means we're doing a couple things a little differently. We're doing one big thing a little differently. This is the day when the very first college football playoff rankings will be unveiled. But because I'm at work, and that's about when our election results will be rolling in, we, rather than use those in today's show, we will use them next week. But this week, we're going to talk about who we think our top 5 teams are at this point. I just as a point of reference, I went back and listened, and when we talked about how just sort of dull this was at the outset, the first show of the season, but we each had the same top 5 when before the season started, from top to bottom: Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. Obviously, stuff has changed a bit since then, as it tends to happen. And also, I'll get to this, but this just feels a little bit different this time. It does.
But to start with, what's your top 5 going to be at this point?
Well, it's really interesting because this is the first time we've done this without knowing what the committee has done. Because normally we've done our first show with these rankings and we're analyzing what the committee has done. So this is fun. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably safe to say that most everybody has the same top 5 teams because there are 5 teams that are undefeated right now. Mm-hmm. And well, there's more than 5 teams undefeated, but there's 5 teams that have been consistently in the top 5. Mm-hmm. The last couple of weeks. So I have the standard undefeated teams in the top 5, but I might have them in a different order. I have number 1 LSU. Okay. I just think that their quality of wins is better than Alabama's at this point. And again, mm-hmm. This is just where we are at this point in the season. Yep. So I've got LSU 1, Ohio State 2.
Okay.
I like their wins better than everybody else's that follow behind them. I've got Clemson 3, Bama 4. I like Clemson above Bama. I think Clemson's got better wins at this point in the season. Bama ain't played nobody. Which is something we're going to talk about when we get to the big one, the big 1-2 game, as they're billing it. And of course, I've got Penn State at 5 as the first mm-hmm. team out at this point. Again, I like where Penn State is sitting. They can play their way into the playoff at this point.
Yep. Yes,
so that's my order: LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Bama, Penn State.
Okay. I kind of went with what I think is going to happen rather than what I want to happen. As you guys know, I'm an Ohio State fan. So perhaps, use that as your disclaimer here. Because I think, well, let me back up. As I mentioned earlier, we were really bored with picking our top 5 at the outset of the season. And, our picks were identical, and we're both just like, oh God, it's a given, especially the top 3 at that point, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, blah, 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 blah. But this time around, I mean, Alabama, do you really? Yeah, I know what the expectations are, but do you really know? Because they haven't played anybody.
Exactly.
Clemson, especially, doesn't seem invincible. Unless they're playing some dude named Wofford like they did last weekend. They're both right there. They're both in the top 4, and they should be. but it doesn't feel as inevitable this time. So I'm going into this last stretch of the season kind of feeling optimistic that this could be pretty interesting. Ohio State could be, and perhaps should be, the number one team in the initial rankings. But I think we're still fighting. We being the Big Ten, still fighting the perception, the whole SEC thing. So I don't think Ohio State will be number one. We vary a little bit. I have LSU 1, Ohio State 2. I have Alabama 3. I have Clemson 4. And that's because just kind of how lackluster Clemson has been so far this season. Again, it's a little hard to say. Clemson had a kind of a top-heavy schedule, so once they got through September, there's not really any tests there. Alabama sort of the opposite, because they don't have anybody really competitive until this weekend. Number 5 is Penn State. And it is fun to note that 4 of those 5 teams will get at least one loss, or could get at least one loss, because they play each other. And that, does that open back up a door for Georgia or Oregon to sneak in there? So there's fun stuff that could happen. But I think that's our we have the same teams as our starting point, and I'm pretty sure the order may differ a little bit, but that's where the committee is going to start as well. Before we get to our games, weekly Clemson Index. Clemson, the Tigers, are at NC State, which got waxed by Wake last weekend. They are favored by 32.5. Carla, what's your index?
I've got it at a 3 this week. I don't think it's very high, even though it is the feature game on ABC on Saturday night, which is another thing I'll mention later. About how all the games are good during the day and they stink in the evening. So NC State's given up they're giving up a bunch of yards, and they lost. They lost their last 2 to Wake and Boston College, and not just lost, they got blown out in both of those games. They're coming off of 2 bad losses on the road. Clemson's playing at home. Yeah, this doesn't feel like much of a Clemsoning threat to me.
I'm still thinking 5. State appears awful. And maybe that's when Clemson is ripe for a stumble. It would be just a mind-boggling upset, of course. But I think that's sort of when that's when the index is at its strongest. We have 3 games. Unlike last season, or like last weekend, it is not hard to figure out which ones we need to talk about this time around. We will start. This is the unofficial Big Noon Saturday because the game is not on Fox; it's on ABC. Number 5, Penn State, a team that Carla is a bit familiar with. At number 13, Minnesota. Penn State is favored by 6.5. Worth noting that PJ Fleck just got a pretty decent contract extension. I think through 26 is what I read. So he's got to be feeling pretty happy going into this game. What do you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say, welcome the Minnesota Golden Gophers to the Carla and Crappy Show, and welcome and welcome PJ Fleck to a new 7-year contract, which is interesting timing because there's obviously been rumors over the last couple of days with Florida State firing Willie Taggart, and possibly another coaching opening at USC at the end of the season. PJ Fleck was at kind of the top of that rumor mill list. So nice move by.
I've heard James Franklin's name mentioned, especially with the USC job as well.
With USC, yeah. I don't think he'll go to Florida State, but I think the USC job might be enticing to him. So that'll be an interesting conversation later. But yeah, nice move by Minnesota to just kind of lock PJ Fleck up for a bit. While they've got some momentum. And Minnesota's put together a really nice start to the season. Although it is interesting, they got off to a slow start. Their first 4 games were actually quite close. And when you look at the opponents, it's kind of a head scratcher because their opponents were South Dakota State, Fresno, Georgia Southern, and Purdue. And they played all those games. They were really close. They won all 4, ended up 4-0. And at that point, like after they beat Purdue, it's like almost a light bulb went off. And then they start blowing teams out. Their next 4 wins are by complete blowouts over Illinois, Nebraska, Rutgers, and Maryland. Like normally you would think that would be reversed. So that's just kind of an interesting season. But here they are. They're 8-0. They've got their coach locked up for another 7 years. Minnesota is on the rise. And I don't know if this is the year that Minnesota takes the next step and moves up a level in the Big Ten. But by golly, pay attention to them next year. I think this is a team. This is the program that's trending in the right direction here. The couple things that I have noted here is that if you look at what makes me nervous about this game is mentally, this feels like a Michigan State game.
Okay.
To me,
Okay.
you got a trending upward Minnesota team playing the underdog card, playing at home. Would love nothing more than to disrupt the apple cart at the national level.
Sure.
It's a huge opportunity for the Gophers at home. So, like I said last week on the show, yes, I am sitting on my hands a little bit in this game, and Penn State needs to be ready for this. But if you look at everything on paper, Penn State definitely has better wins. Minnesota has not faced a team like Penn State yet this season. They're backloaded on their schedule, so their schedule is going to get substantially harder, as they haven't played Wisconsin or Iowa yet. They will do that in the next 3 weeks, so they've got a long road to haul to get to Indianapolis for the Big Ten game. Gophers giving up 20 points per game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for a Penn State offense, it's been playing pretty well. And you consider the fact that the Penn State defense is the number 2 rush defense in the country and the number 2 scoring defense in the country, allowing less than 10 points per game, even after playing Michigan and Michigan State. It feels like this is going to be a slog. I feel like it's going to be. I think it's going to be a ground and pound. And then the most interesting thing is the fact that there's potentially snow in the forecast for Saturday, which I saw today.
Right.
And that makes things really interesting. But I also think that favors Penn State in this, because Penn State doesn't allow any yards on the ground. And Minnesota, gives up a decent number of passing yards, which is good for Sean Clifford, but they've got a little bit of a looser defense here. I think the Penn State offense, if they stay diligent and don't turn the ball over, will win this football game. But don't be surprised if it's one of those. It was a couple years ago that Minnesota was up 13-3 at the half and everybody was panicking in Happy Valley.
Right.
The last time they played, which was like 2016, I think. So it wouldn't stun me if we're sitting at halftime complaining about a slow start by Penn State. That would not shock me by any stretch, but I do think, fingers crossed, that the Nittany Lions pull this one out.
Okay. I'm probably a little bit more confident than you are, and I completely understand where you're coming from, because I have the same. I will go ahead and call myself neurotic about Ohio State when they play games like this.
Yes.
PJ Fleck, Tressel Jr., new contract. He is working his row the boat mind tricks in the Twin Cities, and doing it well. The Gophers are playing solid defense, very Tressel-esque. And statistically comparable to Penn State's, actually. They run the ball well. That's the strength of their offense. They have a Craig Krenzel-ish quarterback in Tanner Morgan, who puts up, again, I'm going to keep using the word solid, because that's what it is. Puts up solid numbers, takes care of the ball. As you mentioned, their best win so far is on the road at Purdue. Earlier this season, they needed double overtime to beat a Fresno State team on the road. That's not terrible. These things. I referenced Ohio State in 2002, and the Luckeyes of that year had several games like that. It's like you got to figure you're not playing your best. You got to figure out how to win it, and then you win it. So those games come up in a big season, and really that's the only way you can classify what Minnesota's done so far. They're set up that way. They're set up for winning the Big Ten West if they can control their destiny, because they still have Iowa and Wisconsin on the schedule. This week, however, Purdue isn't Penn State. I don't think Minnesota has the horses yet to keep up with the Nittany Lions. Next year, we'll see how that looks. But this year, I don't think that's going to work out for them. And that still leaves them in what has to be their immediate goal in winning the Big Ten West. So, but as far as that goes, we'll get to that. Next up at 3:30 on Saturday is the one that you might have heard something about. Number 1 LSU at number 2 Alabama. Alabama is favored by 6.5 points. Carla, what do you think?
Ooh, this is a fun one.
Yes.
So looking at this one, the first thing that jumped out as I was looking at numbers was that the LSU secondary is probably going to face its biggest test of the season, going up against this Alabama offense. The LSU secondary is giving up about 217 yards per game. Bama has been passing for about 338 yards per game. So this is a Bama offense, which is a little bit different than what we're used to. Both these offenses are a little different than what we're used to because we're used to both these teams run first, pass second. And both of these teams this season are definitely the opposite of that, particularly LSU. Interestingly enough, maybe part of that is because they're playing good run defenses. Alabama running back Najee Harris may find some tough sledding on Saturday going up against that LSU defense. LSU defense is number 13 in the country against the run, only giving up about 98 yards per game. So, in addition to the almost fun and gun offense that they've installed there in Louisiana, they're also playing some pretty good defense, which is why I have them ranked so high. In the first week of rankings here, I find it really interesting. I mean, this game's going to be a bruiser. It's going to be probably one of the better games of the season, regardless of how you cut it down. Whether you're pro SEC or you're in the SEC bias campaign.
There's the people who think there's a SEC bias. Okay.
And the source of all that, Paul Finebaum. Actually, it's interesting. I was so as I was doing my research for this game, Finebaum had an interesting segment this morning on ESPN's morning show. And I went back and watched the segment, and he made the statement that, and I normally don't agree with Finebaum, but I absolutely 100% agree with where he was this morning on this. His statement was that Alabama absolutely has to win this game.
Okay.
To have a shot to get into the playoff, because if they lose this game, then they're probably not going to win the division, right? Which means that they won't have a chance to play for the SEC title. Losing to LSU at home is not that's a more substantial loss. Alabama doesn't lose at home. So will they get the opportunity then to sneak into the playoff as like a 4? With that loss and without an opportunity to go play in Atlanta for the SEC title, and their only other major opponent this season is Auburn. That's his logic is that's not a strong enough resume to get them into the playoff. LSU, on the other hand, if LSU loses this game and it's a close game, which it probably will be, that's a decent loss for LSU. So and that's a really interesting thing. The playing at home and where this game is being played really kind of plays a factor into all of this. LSU already has quality wins on the season, so this loss wouldn't necessarily take them out of the picture. So it's really interesting. The biggest question here that we're all asking is how the heck is Tua? And nobody knows at this point because he didn't see any action at all against Arkansas a couple weeks ago. We have to anticipate he's not going to be at 100%. And is Tua at 90% able to keep up with a Joe Burrow who's, functioning at 100%? That's a big question right now. I think both defenses can make some stops here, but can the offenses keep up with each other? I don't know. I like LSU in this. I really do. I think the LSU defense is solid. I have questions about Tua. Alabama has looked mortal this year, as opposed to other years. They aren't quite firing as in sync as they usually are. We said at the beginning of the season that we thought this might be the year that Georgia could overtake Alabama. Maybe it's not Georgia, maybe it's LSU. I like the way that LSU offense is playing. LSU in a close one.
Okay. In years past, you would look at this game and sort of hope against hope that LSU could pull off some kind of miracle. As I look at this game this week, right now, I think, how is Alabama favored by a touchdown?
Yeah.
Statistically, these teams are pretty much mirror images, so we don't learn a whole lot there. But these things, which team has a better quarterback? Which team has a healthier quarterback as well? I think that's LSU. Which team has better number one tailback and wide receiver? I think that's LSU. Which team has been tested this season? Hint: it's not Alabama. They had the game at Texas A&M when Texas A&M was 24th or 25th or something like that. LSU, on the other hand, Texas, Florida, Auburn, those were all ranked teams.
Top 10 teams.
Top 10 teams when the Tigers beat them. This really, I keep saying this really doesn't feel like the Alabama that we've seen the past few years. And feels like, it looks like to me that LSU is the class of the SEC this season. And I think they go in there and beat Alabama on Saturday. And that makes things even more interesting.
It does. It does.
It does. At 4 p.m. on Saturday, we have a game that actually will have more to do with the winning the Big Ten West than your game does. Number 18 Iowa at number 16 Wisconsin. The Badgers are favored by 9.5 points. Carla, what do you think?
What a stretch it's been for Wisconsin.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, the last two games, I mean, gosh, it's it just that hasn't been a good time in the land of Madison and the cheeseheads, as it may be.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest question I have entering this game is, will Jonathan Taylor be able to run against that Iowa defense? The Iowa defense is solid against the run. We saw that against Penn State. They were able to kind of hold that run game in, and you've got one of the best backs in the country going up against this defense. That's going to be an interesting thing to watch. And also,
and he can be stopped against a good run defense, as we found a couple weeks ago.
Yep. Yeah. Ohio State held him to 52 yards on 20 carries. I went and looked that up. So yes, facing a good run defense can slow him down. And so then how does that impact the entirety of the Wisconsin offense? They're going to have to rely on the arm of Jack Cohn, who you have to question his confidence at this point, unfortunately, because it was his pick that kind of, caused the upset at Illinois. And then, last week or 2 weeks ago against Ohio State, just kind of getting beat up on the field by that Ohio State defense. So, this is a Wisconsin team that you kind of feel is kind of teetering a little bit here. Like this is a huge game for their season, because it's going to determine whether or not they're going to be able to make a run at Minnesota to play for a Big Ten title.
That's a hell of a thing to say.
Isn't that a weird thing to say?
I know. But here we are.
Here we are. Well, and then the flip side of the coin here is that you've got an Iowa team who already had 2 losses in a row. Now they're riding a 2-game win streak, and they're riding into this game feeling like, okay, we've got Wisconsin. Let's go get them. Their run defense is number 8 in the country. The challenge here is that they're giving up passing yards, which actually is good news for Cohn and the passing game for Wisconsin. Wisconsin is also good at stopping the run. However, Iowa tends to lead with its passing game because, Nate Stanley, who with just, a couple of throws will surpass 2,000 yards already on the season on Saturday. Wisconsin's putting up more points per game than Iowa. They're playing at home for the first time in 2 weeks after this stretch of losses here. This game is tight. I went back and forth on this trying to figure out because, the stats don't really tell you anything. It's really about the mindset. And I keep thinking, as much as I want to say Wisconsin's falling apart, I feel like this is a game that's going to put them back on track. I just feel like they're playing at home. There's some opportunity here. I know that Iowa's run defense is good, but you know who else's run defense is good? Wisconsin's. So I'm kind of feeling like this is an opportunity for the Badgers to reset their season, get back on the right path to go play Minnesota for a chance at the Big Ten West title. Although Minnesota has to lose twice, so they would have to lose this, so there's a lot going on here, but I'm going to say Bucky wins in a close one, but I'm really on the fence on this one. It wouldn't stun me to see Iowa pull off the upset. Okay.
Iowa's so far, I think is like the mirror image of its coach, Kirk Ferentz. Steady. I could use the word solid again. Winning games it should, and only losing to better teams like Michigan or Penn State, and even then not losing badly. Those were both both tight games. A win by the Hawkeyes here would set up a de facto title game against Minnesota, a division title game against Minnesota next weekend. But the thing that's bad for them, I think. I know what Wisconsin is. The loss at Illinois was inexplicable. The loss in their last game at Ohio State, perhaps more explicable. I think that's an easier one to understand. I would still put Wisconsin in the same classification as teams like Michigan State and Penn State. Maybe not quite, not as good as Penn State, but the kind of team that Iowa can compete with. Which is why you still kind of hesitate, but probably can't and shouldn't beat. And with these 2 missteps in the last 2 games, Wisconsin still has an opportunity to control its own fate and get to the Big Ten title game. I think that is a sort of a chance to redeem their season, and I think they're going to start working on that this weekend. This is another tight game, and I could be wrong. This is something that Iowa could win because they play these teams really tight. Yeah, but I think Wisconsin will eke this out in the end, and that sets up even more fun out there in the Big Ten West.
Right.
November's going to be awesome. I think regardless of what happens this weekend, it's going to be a lot of fun. And you should be here with us for the rest of the season. You can find the Carla and Crabby Show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, as well as a variety of other podcasting services. You can also watch us babble on YouTube and our Facebook page. If you dig the show, please subscribe, rate, and review if you don't mind your own damn business. And as always, come back for the rest of November, because it's going to be fun, kids. Carla, do you have any final thoughts?
2 games not to sleep on this weekend, real quick.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they're happening at the same time as all the other games. All the games this weekend that are good are early, so make dinner plans Saturday night.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, football gods. So the 2 games not to sleep on are both Big 12 games. Baylor at TCU, very intriguing. Mm-hmm. TCU's defense could mess with Baylor's perfect season, so keep your eyes on that one. I also love K-State at Texas. This Kansas State team that just knocked off Oklahoma, playing a Texas team that has a very similar offensive style to Oklahoma. Can K-State do it 2 years in a row or 2 weeks in a row? We'll see. But yeah, don't sleep on those 2 games. Just because the Big 12 is fun, they don't mean anything, but whatever. If you like offenses, go tune into both those games. Sort
of like an extension of a group of 5 after dark, except the group of 1. Can we call it group of 1 before dark? Something like that.
Something like that.
Guys, I tell you what, I appreciate you watching. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we will be back with more fun next week, along with actual college football playoff returns. Carla, this is the best I can do.
Beer on a phone. I love it.
It's kind of sad. Okay.
That's awesome. Cheers.
It's sort of pathetic, actually. Guys, cheers. Thank you very much for watching, and we will talk to you again soon.